For most Division III athletes, making it to a professional league is not a top priority, as the chances are very slim. Most play purely out of love for the sport and nothing else. That applies to most people. Ken Anderson was not like most. Ken Anderson went from being an undersized Division III quarterback to one of the greatest quarterbacks of his era, winning an MVP, an AFC championship, and becoming a four-time Pro Bowler in his 16-year NFL career with the Cincinnati Bengals. Ken Anderson was born on February 15, 1949 in Batavia, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. Growing up, Anderson played a multitude of sports with his neighbor, Dan Issel, who would go on to become a Hall of Fame NBA player with the Denver Nuggets. As a senior in high school, Ken was offered a scholarship to play basketball and football at Augustana College, a local Division III school located in Rock Island, Illinois. In college, he broke every passing record in the football program's history, while also going on to become a 1,000-point scorer in basketball. Needless to say, Ken Anderson was a hell of a college athlete. By the time Anderson was a senior, word had spread of his massive talent to reach Paul Brown, then head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals. Coach Brown sent Coach Bill Walsh to scout Anderson. After Walsh informed Paul Brown of Anderson's capabilities, the Cincinnati Bengals drafted Anderson with the 67th pick in the third round of the 1971 NFL Draft. At the time of his arrival to the NFL, the Cincinnati Bengals did not believe that Anderson was fundamentally ready to take over a starting quarterback job on the big stage. After starting quarterback Virgil Carter was injured in Week 3 of the 1971 season, Coach Paul Brown decided to start a young rookie Anderson. Anderson made starts sporadically throughout the season, finishing with a record of 1-4 with 5 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and 777 yards. Although Anderson didn't have the greatest performance in 1971, the Bengals believed that he was the right man to lead the team, and named Anderson the starter in 1972. Under Anderson, the team compiled an 8-6 record, while Anderson threw for 7 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and 1,918 yards. From 1973 to 1976, the star that was within Ken Anderson began to rise as his performances continued to get better year after year. In 1973, Anderson led the Bengals to a 10-4 record, reaching the AFC divisional round despite the team suffering from a hurt receiving core and being 3 games out of first place 8 games into a 14-game season. The Bengals would go on to lose against the eventual Super Bowl Miami Dolphins led by Don Shula. 1975 was the biggest season of Anderson's young career, where he was elected to his first Pro Bowl, leading the Bengals to an 11-3 season, reaching the AFC divisional round, where they lost to the Oakland Raiders, led by John Madden. Anderson's second Pro Bowl came the following year, where he led the team to a 10-4 record, though they missed the playoffs. When everything seemed to be going right for Anderson, his career began spiraling out of control. The team lacked an offensive line, leading Anderson to take 400 quarterback hits and 128 sacks in a 4-year span from 1977 to 1980. He suffered multiple knee injuries, a broken hand, and a bruised back all within this time. The Bengals even went as far as to draft quarterback Jack Thompson in 1979 to replace Anderson, but Thompson had a short-lived career, going 1-3 in 4 starts with the Bengals in 1980. Missing 4 playoffs in a row, it was safe to say that Anderson's job was on thin ice. The Bengals were frustrated with how things were moving, and heading into the 1981 season, they wanted to dramatically improve. Their receiving core was led by a young 6'5" receiver named Chris Collinsworth, while the line was held down by future Hall of Famer Anthony Munoz. Heading into the first game of the season against the Seattle Seahawks, the Bengals felt confident, but their confidence fell quickly after Anderson threw 3 interceptions in the first half. Coming out of halftime, Coach Forrest Gregg decided to bench Anderson and start Turk Schonert, the backup. Schonert led the Bengals back from a 21-0 deficit to win the game 27-21. Heading into Week 2, it was unclear whether or not Anderson would remain the starting quarterback, but after he had a conversation with Coach Gregg, Anderson would make the start and lead the Bengals to a narrow victory over the Jets by a score of 31-30. In the 1982 divisional round, Anderson obtained his first playoff victory, defeating the Buffalo Bills by a score of 28-21. They would advance to play the San Diego Chargers led by Dan Fouts in the AFC Championship, a game that is forever remembered as the Freezer Bowl due to it being -9 degrees Fahrenheit, with 27-mile-an-hour winds. Despite the conditions, the Bengals easily bested the Chargers, winning the game 27-7, and were headed to the Super Bowl for the first time in franchise history. At the conclusion of the 1981 season, Anderson was named the NFL MVP. Super Bowl XVI took place in the Pontiac Silverdome in Pontiac, Michigan, as the 49ers took on the Bengals. The 49ers had beaten the Bengals earlier that year, but the two teams were viewed evenly matched as the 49ers were only 2-point favorites. The 49ers were led by future Hall of Fame quarterback Joe Montana, while the Bengals were led by Ken Anderson. On the opening kickoff, 49ers kick returner Amos Lawrence fumbled the ball at his own 26-yard line. This immediately put the Cincinnati Bengals into scoring position. After advancing to the 5-yard line, Ken Anderson was sacked, and then the next play threw an interception to 49er Dwight Hicks. The 49ers would march down the field to score a touchdown on a Montana quarterback sneak. In the second quarter, the Bengals were once again in scoring position, but this time Collinsworth fumbled the ball at the 5-yard line after being tackled by Eric Wright. Once again, the 49ers marched down the field and scored on a touchdown pass to fullback Earl Cooper. Going into the half, the 49ers led the Bengals 20-0. In the third quarter, the Bengals struck back, driving 83 yards down the field in 9 plays. This led Anderson rushing in for a 5-yard touchdown, closing the 49er lead 20-7. Shortly after, the Bengals were back in scoring position. However, the 49ers quickly stopped them. Luckily, the Bengals struck back once again, and this time Ken Anderson hit Dan Ross for a 4-yard pass. The 49ers didn't stop, though, and kicked 2 more field goals, getting their lead to 23-14. Although the Bengals scored with 21 seconds left in the game, they were unable to convert an onside kick and would go on. 1982 was another strong year for Anderson, where he completed 70.6% of his passes, a record that stood for 27 years until Drew Brees tied it in 2009. Although the 1982 NFL season was reduced to a 9-game season from the players' strike, the Bengals finished 7-2, with Anderson advancing to his 4th and final Pro Bowl. The Bengals would go on to lose in the first round of the playoffs to the New York Jets. In Week 6 of the 1983 season, the career trajectory of Ken Anderson was forever changed after he sustained a neck injury from Keith Gary on a face mask penalty. After missing 3 weeks, Anderson came back, but the Bengals failed to reach the playoffs after going 7-9. The following year, the Bengals failed to make the playoffs once again after going 8-8. This led the Bengals to draft a young Boomer Esiason, who would go on to replace Anderson and become an MVP himself. At the conclusion of the 1986 season, Ken Anderson retired from professional football after being told he would risk permanent damage if he continued to play. At the time of Anderson's retirement, he completed 59.3% of his career passes for 32,838 yards, with 197 touchdowns and 160 interceptions. He also had 2,220 rushing yards, with 20 touchdowns, averaging 5.6 yards per rush, one of the highest in NFL history. He led the NFL in passer rating 4 times, led the NFL in passing yards twice, was selected to 4 Pro Bowls, 1-time All-Pro, and the 1981 NFL MVP. After his playing career, Anderson held coaching positions for the Cincinnati Bengals, the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the Pittsburgh Steelers. During Anderson's time with the Steelers, he developed Ben Roethlisberger into one of the best quarterbacks in the league, when he threw for over 10,000 yards, 75 touchdowns, and 38 interceptions. Many believe that Anderson is deserving of a Hall of Fame spot, and although he was named a finalist in 1996 and 1998, he is yet to be inducted. Anderson's Hall of Fame status has been a controversial debate for many years. Do you believe Anderson is deserving of a Hall call? Let me know in the comments below. This concludes this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed putting it together. Until next time, bye for now.